Steam locomotives in miniature at the Steam Workshop. This is an interesting one. It's rebuilding a 3-inch scale Garrett traction engine part 10, and it's all about fitting the bunker tank, which is the back bit. On a full-size traction engine, this part is much more than just a water tank at the back of the engine. It's the part where the driver and the steersman stand. It also holds the coal and other bits and pieces. As I've never built a model traction engine, I've never given it any thought as to how they're put together. The back part of the traction engine is not very strong. It's mainly sheet metal around a tank. And in the case of this miniature traction engine, the whole thing is made from copper, which is a very soft metal. However, it has these very strong steel struts that fit to the horn blocks, which are the main mounting for the axle, and they run all the way to the back, where they meet up with a really substantial drag beam across the back. So if the traction engine is pulling anything, the load is fully transferred to the struts and no stress is put on the bunker tank. The only problem for me now is these struts are attached to the axle box horns with 11 bolts, and that's on each side, so I need a method to hold the nuts so that they line up with the bolts in what is a very inaccessible place. Before anybody writes in, I know all the tricks of sticking the nuts to your fingers, etc., but it's very messy. This method is slightly less messy. I asked John if he had any grease, and John referred me to Dave and said Dave has a jar of Vaseline. So much mirth ensued, and after we finished giggling about the Vaseline, I used it to stick the nuts to my fingers, which made it very easy to position them behind the bolts and in turn tighten the bolts onto the nuts. Simple. When Dave was questioned as to why he had a jar of Vaseline in the workshop, he did mention that he actually had 2 jars of Vaseline. And after more stupid comments about Vaseline and other jokes related to Vaseline, we all got back to work. These are the water pickup and return pipes for the water pump, and they go down into the bunker tank. And for some reason I couldn't find the longer one of the two, but John seemed to spot it immediately. These 2 pieces of copper pipe fit into 2 guide tubes that go down into the bunker tank. More about that in a future episode. There are 2 metal packing pieces, and I can only find one of them, and this one's for the other side, so I need to make a new packing piece for this side. Using a hacksaw, the old-fashioned method, I cut this piece of steel from a longer piece. You can see what I'm doing here fairly clearly. I put it in position, and using a drill with the original holes in the bracket as a guide, I make a centre pop in the right place. Then I remove the piece of metal, then take it over to the drilling machine and drill 3 holes clearance size for 2BA bolts. Here I'm drilling all the way through into the steel mounting plate, and I'm drilling this tapping size for 2BA. Then after I change the drill bit for a larger one, I'm drilling through the outer part only, clearance size for the 2BA bolts. And then, being very careful not to snap off the tap, I tap the holes, 2BA. When using a 2BA tap, generally speaking, depending on the metal that I'm using the tap on, I would go in about 3 turns and then back out one. This clears the swarf and stops the tap from jamming. And once all that was done, I insert the piece that I've just drilled in the drilling machine. Even though this is out of sequence, you can see that I've countersunk the holes, and the depth of the countersink needs to be quite deep because the only bolts I had that were the right length had slightly domed heads, and these need to be just below the level of the metal because there's a mounting plate going to go on this, and this mounting plate is part of the suspension, so it's really important that it can go up and down very smoothly without catching on any bolts. A couple of the bolts were quite tight in these holes, but rerunning the tap through the holes made everything fit very well. I think the problem was that the countersink had put a bit of a burr on the metal, or maybe originally I didn't go in deep enough with the tap, but it's okay now, everything fits just as it should. I have to confess that I couldn't do all of this job single-handed. Simon helped me fit the nut onto the bolt on the top left-hand side of the bracket. The bottom 2 at each side were fairly tricky, but Dave's Vaseline did the trick. This plate does not fit squarely onto the axle tube. I don't know why, probably it was a mistake. The next part of the job is to fit the drag beam across the back of the bunker tank. You can see here what I'm doing. I'm filing out the slots, getting rid of the paint. It's quite a neat design this, a quick release drag beam at the back of the traction engine. Although I don't think that is really the idea of the design, but it's very strong because 2 lugs on the drag beam fit through these 2 slots, and that's really going to be going nowhere. And of course this is only a model with very thin steel. The full-size steel will be considerably thicker than this. After quite a bit of needle filing, I finally got it so that the lugs slid into the slots without removing too much of the paint. And finally, at this side, the drag beam is held in position by a tapered peg like this, not dissimilar to the way that some kitchen tables are made, except that this is a steel peg, not just a piece of wood. Yes, I'm quite pleased with that, not too much paint loss at all. Finally, the drag beam is held to a bracket on the bunker tank, or should I say, the bunker tank is held to the drag beam with a single nut and bolt at each side. I remember doing this because I lost the will to live on several occasions. It's quite a long bolt, and I can only get a fraction of a turn on it each time with the spanner. But eventually, once the nut and bolt were tight, the drag beam was held very firmly, and there's still the other side to go yet. This engine is starting to get very heavy. You will notice that it sits on a piece of a tree now, not just a wooden block, and because it's a wide base, I can tip it a little bit to get my hand underneath. And it is essential that with a model of this weight it is adequately supported, because I don't want it to fall off the block and crush my hand, otherwise I may never play the piano again. Thanks for watching, and I hope you found it useful.